So in an utterly unceremonious fashion, in the early hours of a dark, cold January morning, Nintendo finally, officially unveiled the successor to what will likely go down as the most successful product in their company's entire history. And for people that know me, it's probably not a shock to hear my initial reaction was a bit grumpy, barely conscious, and with just one eye open. I rolled over to my nightstand, grabbed my phone, and took in the nonchalant hardware flyby that literally every tech company uses to unveil a new product these days just once before going right back to sleep. But not before sneaking in a snarky Blue Sky post expressing my distaste. And I think that's because this reveal felt entirely like a formality, with the mere presence of a big, bold number 2 confirming a lot of my suspicions about Nintendo's plans for the future. This hardware generation is going to be primarily, if not purely, iterative. Originally, I wasn't even going to share my thoughts until April, when Nintendo is planning to reveal more concrete information, because, at least in this moment, I'm not that interested in providing frame-by-frame Mario Kart analysis or taking a hard stance between excitement or pessimism. I'm sure there's enough of that elsewhere. However, what does interest me is what I think is an honest concern rising from beneath the raw takes and reactions. Has Nintendo changed? And I mean really changed, because it's not just me posing the question, wondering if this emergence of the Switch 2 is evidence of Nintendo evolving in a way that may not be truly reflective of their core values. Were they so scarred by their biggest failure since the Virtual Boy, when fans and industry figures alike were suggesting they may be better off abandoning the hardware business entirely, that instead of taking a daring step forward towards defining a new trend, they've settled on squeezing the Switch concept until it has nothing left to give? Or is the Switch simply unsqueezable? I want to take a deeper look at this because it's an idea I've considered for a while now, with my own opinions provoking a wide mix of reactions. And with the turn of a new era, I think it's about time to give those thoughts a second look. So let's try to answer that question. With confirmation of the Nintendo Switch 2, what can we at least infer about the road ahead? Is the quirky and charming Nintendo of old well and truly dead? And could their future be defined by an exhausting cycle of iteration rather than the brazen attempts at innovation that has made following them feel like a wild roller coaster ride full of ups and downs? Will I pay for my crimes as the Wii U's #1 defender? Stay tuned to find out. Admittedly, the lens in which I viewed Nintendo just a few years ago was defined by fatigue and frustration. While I had spent the previous generation deeply invested in both their evolving communication strategy and release schedule that rewarded me with exciting new entries to many of my personal favorite series, along with a few new ideas I was excited to give a shot, the jump to the Switch, for one reason or another, failed to satisfy. In retrospect, the Switch has become arguably the greatest console in Nintendo history with respect to the consistency of its content output, thanks to its ability to attract a frankly overwhelming volume of third-party support, in addition to being just one unified destination for all of Nintendo's own games. For core gamers reconnecting with Nintendo after feeling alienated by their decade-long shift chasing a more casual, non-gamer audience as well as those with a preference for handheld play, this was undoubtedly amazing. Unfortunately for myself, I failed to fall into either of these camps. As a child, I used to dream about being able to play my favorite home console games portably with my entire library available at a moment's notice. But ironically, I feel the exact opposite in my adulthood. Video games for me have primarily become an at-home activity, best experienced fully immersed on the couch and shared with family and friends. And because I spend so much time playing and thinking about them, my first inclination traveling across the country or even just down the street isn't to pick up my console and continue playing, but to take the opportunity to completely disconnect and pick up a book or watch a movie. At the same time, the Switch's value as a single-player or couch multiplayer machine failed to eclipse what the Wii U offered me, as difficult as that may be to believe. I honestly played about as many individual games on my Switch this generation as I did on the Wii U, not even counting my 3DS library. The primary reason being the Switch could never be my primary gaming platform. The hit to performance and graphical fidelity made picking up single-player, multi-platform games on my PC a no-brainer, while couch multiplayer games felt plagued either by poor performance or the unique deficiencies of Nintendo's controllers. All for a compromise I would rarely indulge in. That left my Switch with the sole responsibility of delivering games I simply couldn't play on another platform. A library that withered after accounting for all the remasters I wasn't interested in, and the ports of Wii U games I already played, both of which continued to bolster its appeal to the average player. Just, for a second, imagine me holding up my hands. I recognize these are all highly specific and somewhat niche issues. Nevertheless, these were the problems that got in the way of me enjoying the Switch as much as I wanted to, which sucked because I've loved Nintendo my entire life. And sometime in 2021, I just had enough. It was after a staggeringly long 50-minute Nintendo Direct, following a fairly slow COVID year, blindsiding me with the admission Nintendo intended to share nothing regarding their next highly anticipated Zelda game, while tempting me to buy into yet another fully priced remaster of a game I already owned in the same breath, which kind of made all the painful realities of this modern gaming climate really begin to sink in. Among the sea of non-exclusive ports I knew would best be played on another device, the amount of games I could truly consider myself excited for were less than what I could count on a single hand. I didn't want to be that guy, but I just felt frustrated and crushed. For a moment, I just wanted to allow myself to dip back into a nostalgic period and remember what it felt like to rediscover my love for Nintendo. And what I found was that in spite of certain aspects of my life at the time undoubtedly playing a large role in my attachment to the Wii U and Nintendo, being a part of that weird experiment was amazing in its own way, as it was defined by core values I appreciate even more today, even if they didn't end up working out. To me, what stood out about the Wii U was how it felt just as iterative as it was attempting to innovate, striving to bridge the gap between the core and casual audience by including so many different options for play without defining the entire experience around a single one. Not only was there refined motion control, but also touch. And while asynchronous play did not catch on nearly as much as the former innovations, it absolutely played a key role in some of my favorite Wii U games. And that's not to even mention the user experience of both consoles that felt like a culmination of Nintendo's efforts to refine their aesthetic across all their active platforms, help players discover new games, and connect fans in the living room and across the world with free online connectivity and social features like Street Pass and Miiverse. For me, the Wii U was the Wii 2, and a DS on my TV, continuing to iterate on what its predecessors did so right while rectifying a lot of what pushed me away the prior generation. Its potential unfortunately went unrealized due to a remarkably poor start, following a critical failure to properly market its value. By the time it could really get going, it was simply too late, and would thus be prematurely killed off, as much of that potential was eventually realized by the Switch, but not without leaving behind a lot of what I valued. While making my previous video reflecting on this experience, I knew I would spark a debate and potentially tank a lot of hate because of how uncommon my experience and perspective was. Because I know how it can feel when met with an argument seemingly so nonsensical it makes your head spin, and that the statistics outright refute. For a while though, I genuinely felt alone and crazy for feeling this way, with a desperate desire just to see if anyone else could see the value in what I saw. And I don't know, man. While 2 years later, I definitely think I could have crafted some of my arguments a lot better, I still believe the core of my belief is valid, because what I couldn't possibly foresee was how many people my thoughts would reach and connect with. I ended that video expressing my worry for the future of my favorite game developer, fearing their overwhelming success would be followed by an extended period of complacency before another large failure. If I really wanted to, I could seize that affirmation, dig my heels in, and stop believing in Nintendo. But that's not why I'm here. Ever since venting my personal frustrations, I've been thinking a lot about what I really want, while trying to adopt a more principled mindset about what I should be arguing for. Immediately following my video's release at the end of 2022, I lucked out incredibly with respect to my personal taste. Tears of the Kingdom and Mario Wonder were both incredibly fun. Ever since the release of WarioWare Get It Together, I'd been hoping for something more similar to Smooth Moves, and we got it. Even though I wasn't playing the remakes offered, I'm at least happy so many others have gotten to experience some of my favorite games for the first time ever. Especially Metroid Prime, whose remaster set a new standard in terms of craftsmanship and value. Pikmin 4, a game I was waiting so long to play, I grew accustomed to believing no longer existed, suddenly appeared and instantly became one of my highlights of the entire year. And even something as easily overlooked as F-Zero 99 completely surprised me, once again demonstrating no cherished property will stay forever dormant with the right idea and correct timing. I think 2023 will go down as one of the best years of the Switch's life. But releasing new entries for any particular person's favorite series isn't a generational strategy. And if we re-examine the lasting reception to some of these, it's certainly not without criticism regarding Nintendo's ability to deliver consistently high-quality experiences through an iterative process. If there is a common theme here, it's their pursuit of iteration over pure innovation. And when executed to the best of their ability, that is just as valuable to me as their desire to be innovators. Nintendo is at its best, striving to deliver a careful balance of both, which brings us to the Switch 2. My initial cynicism left me scoffing at the brand packaging of their new console, as there wasn't any immediate indication of a new feature reminding me of Nintendo's zany, trend-setting past. The entire device is slightly larger with a few minor revisions that easily could have been standard features of the previous console. A stronger kickstand with a wider axis of rotation, an additional USB-C port allowing players to more easily play and charge simultaneously, and slightly revised Joy-Con with elevated shoulder buttons that should at least be as comfortable as the previous version with the attached wrist strap. The vibrant default color scheme has been reduced from a solid single tone covering the entire controller to minimalist accents. And with a big, bold number 2 on the back of the system, the dock, and even the new Joy-Con grip so large it's impossible to miss, I think the entire thing is kind of ugly. Seriously, I've seen more inventive concepts prior to its unveil on social media from Nintendo's own fans. Shout out to Daniel Alba of GVG for this neat animation demonstrating the magnetism of the new Joy-Con. Rather than appearing to be a device ushering in an entirely new generation of games and accessories, the Switch 2 looks more like a new SKU of the existing Switch, not dissimilar from Nintendo's other handhelds like the Game Boy Advance SP or the 3DS XL. And I think that's why they had no other choice but to brand it the Nintendo Switch 2. A safe yet stark contrast from Nintendo's naming conventions of the past. It's just different enough to mitigate consumer confusion while still capitalizing on the Switch's core appeal and brand recognition. This is largely what satisfied fans of the existing Switch have been asking for. Simply a more powerful iteration preserving its novel functionality while delivering better performance and fidelity for the next decade of video games. In turn, keeping graphical concessions like these to a minimum. But I still have to wonder, is the turn of a generation with the promise of more powerful hardware enough to recapture the type of audience Nintendo is after? There's certainly enough evidence to suggest the concept itself is timeless, with the vast majority of existing properties selling better on the Switch than any prior platform, even into the late stages of its life. And I mean, I know I'll be fighting to purchase it day one, in spite of any of my criticism, alongside other fans who have been asking for this for upwards of the past 5 years. But What about the parents who didn't purchase the Switch until the peak of its life cycle just a few years ago, or are still waiting to purchase one following the inevitable price drop? What about the third-party and indie developers that don't necessarily need the power and want to continue marketing their games to the current install base, still climbing into the hundreds of millions? What about Nintendo themselves, who will likely continue to release software on both platforms through this transitional period? What then will drive the bulk of early purchases, allowing this new product to spread naturally through word of mouth? Historically, Nintendo has struggled during the hardware transition phase, particularly after entering a primarily iterative cycle. And that means there could be a world where the Switch 2 struggles to escape the shadow of its predecessor. Given their recent actions, however, I have to believe they have more than adequately prepared themselves for this moment. I think it's accurate to say the Switch feels like an endgame product for Nintendo. Instead of exploring a wildly new frontier and defining itself around any single feature like couch multiplayer, portability, motion control, or touch, it sought to consolidate so much of what made Nintendo truly successful in the past while effectively trimming the fat by centering the experience around a fairly universal appeal. If you're not me, that is. It became the default destination for an enormously wide range of ideas, with Nintendo themselves feeling abundantly confident in this direction. Just following the release of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, technical director Takahiro Dota expressed this at GDC 2017, stating,
"We also began thinking of ways to use Breath of the Wild to show off the appeal of the platform itself. The Nintendo Switch features a number of unique play elements, with the Joy-Con controllers being the most obvious example, and I think we excel at designing games that take advantage of these tools for play. However, Breath of the Wild doesn't include anything like this. For Breath of the Wild, we wanted to deliver the same game design for both players on the Wii U and Nintendo Switch. But looking back on our previous hardware, we've always had launch titles that carry the additional duty of making the appeal of the hardware easy to see. But then, what did we want to try and convey with this version of the game? It's the novelty of being able to take it with you anywhere you go. And also, that you get this added value automatically without having to design for it. We were the first ones to be caught off guard and surprised by this. And it's something I wanted to make sure to convey to both fans and developers alike."
While I kind of lament the loss of Breath of the Wild's Wii U specific features, he's absolutely right about the Switch's practicality for both consumers and developers, even for me. For as much as I've grown disillusioned with the compromise over time, seeing Breath of the Wild in that moment running surprisingly well on such a small device, what is ultimately a successful iteration of one of the Wii U's selling points, was definitely enough to feel enchanted with the premise. And for its developers, I'm sure it was refreshing to be able to design games freely after subsequent generations of what many feel are gimmicks steering the focus of development. As much as I love when Nintendo attempts something bold and new, often pushing the industry around them forward, some of my favorite times to play Nintendo games have been when their primary goal was to simply improve, because it forced them to deliver new spins on core concepts with an already rock-solid foundation. Those periods haven't been their most successful, but they are a necessary step of the process. What is different now, however, is the fact that the benefits of purely more powerful hardware aren't as directly visible as they were back then, and are even beginning to cause a prolonged period of turmoil industry-wide, no longer outweighing the costs associated with them. Nintendo has been in this position more than any other hardware manufacturer in this industry, and I think now, more than ever, they're feeling the pressure of evolving this major one-off success into a lasting, sustainable future, meeting the market where it's at instead of taking a big swing followed by a big miss. How they respond to this pressure is going to dictate how successful this generation is for them. There's obviously so much I don't know right now, but along those lines, there are certainly some unquestionable slam dunks that could instantly make the Switch 2 a more desirable purchase. On top of the existing backwards compatibility, performance patches for Nintendo's best games that have long been held back by the original Switch hardware would be wonderful, as there were definitely some games I passed up purely due to performance issues, and I would love to give those a real shot. I actually think the revised Joy-Con have the potential to become the greatest all-in-one controller ever if they successfully remedy the previous iteration's fundamental issues, in addition to providing this game-changing new mouse functionality. That's gonna be peak in Pikmin 5. Maybe the unmarked C button here is the first step in reintroducing some of those communal aspects from the Wii U and 3DS I miss so dearly. And I don't know if this is somehow becoming a hot take at this point, but I am so tired of Nintendo's lack of care with respect to the Switch's eShop. I'm not fully confident they're willing to make sweeping changes, but the entire storefront is in desperate need of some serious quality control, with asset flips and scams exploiting sales tactics and taking as much screen real estate as possible to bury quality games, preventing them from being discovered. New hardware provides the perfect opportunity to make a change. This one's a bit of a punt, but I also want to feel valued as a consumer again. One of the worst parts of the Switch generation was, frankly, the greed Nintendo projected through some of their more shameful business practices that were at least a little less prominent during the 3DS and Wii U era, especially when they were struggling. Their online service was cheap, sure, but for the vast majority of this cycle, I think it failed to provide a fraction of the value proportional to the revenue it was likely generating. I don't want to hitch myself to the service for a year at an increased rate to play Nintendo 64 games that need patches to barely match the quality of what fans are providing for themselves. Nor do I want to lock myself and 7 others into a blood pact to get a good deal out of it, especially while the Wii, DS, and GameCube libraries are still being held hostage, either by overpriced porting or the outright delisting of their former homes. I'm also sick of the exploitation of FOMO they've tested through limited time availability, or Wii U ports with new side content made unavailable to players who already purchased these games at full price, lest they want to shell out an additional $60 for a few extra hours of new stuff. And it's downright disgraceful how some of their most prolific IP has transitioned to the Switch. I've never wanted to skip a mainline Pokemon game until now. And as someone who counts Donkey Kong as one of their all-time favorite Nintendo series, let's just say I'm hoping DK is going to be treated much better in the future than he has most recently. I'm getting heated, but it just doesn't make sense to me that this is $60 when this is $40. I think Nintendo could generate a ton of goodwill by continuing to build out the value of their service with better online infrastructure, and by offering greater flexibility in their pricing models. The bottom line, though, is that the games ushering in this generation have to be some of the best we've ever seen. Even though many of the reasons that left me unsatisfied with the Switch were what allowed it to really fall into a groove with a regular cadence of releases, I don't know if the Switch 2 can maximize its potential by continuing to rely on remakes, remasters, and direct ports from a previous failed console. That well is beginning to run dry. I also don't know if they can successfully just release a Breath of the Wild 3, another series of gap-filling Mario Sports entries, or even another Smash Bros. Game without serious radical changes when the self-described ultimate final iteration of the idea is still just as playable. And that's why, in spite of all my individual hang-ups, I am exceptionally interested in seeing how Nintendo is going to address this problem. They've accumulated a treasure hoard of valuable partnerships over the last decade. And what they can do is continue leveraging that trust with more experimental, tighter scope projects driven by strong IP with a potentially lower cost of entry, setting a positive example for an industry buckling under the weight of unsustainable budgets. But maybe that's wishful thinking. Even more so than the internal development groups working as hard as they can to consistently deliver new entries in each of the franchises they are solely responsible for, I want to see more of what burgeoning studios like Mercury Steam, Grezzo, and Nintendo Software Technology can do with even more freedom. I don't know if you've noticed, but Throughout the Switch's life, along with all the beginner-friendly games meant to onboard new players and the chaotic, amusing multiplayer that effortlessly brings family and friends together, Nintendo's design philosophy has continued to evolve by seeking to provide players the agency and tools to craft their own individualized adventures and express their creativity within a predetermined set of parameters. Almost like how we did with our childhood toys growing up. And that's kind of what the Switch is. It's a canvas surrounded by countless tools, unlocking the creativity of any and all developers who wish to support it without having to follow a strict design mandate. Seeing what developers can do with the data and feedback of this past generation as they continue to refine and balance the formula that brought us some of the most prolific games of the last decade is easily the most exciting aspect of this next step forward. You know, this should be obvious to most people, but it's truly a wonder what venting your frustrations can do as far as guiding you to a state of mental clarity. I was so dejected and frustrated in 2022 that I spent countless hours watching old Nintendo Directs to try to figure out why I was deriving no greater joy from them than I do the damn Game Awards. And when you're digging that deep, your biases become abundantly clear to everyone. One thing I couldn't predict, though, was that simply exploring those past experiences was such a valuable exercise in demonstrating to myself what I really value. And it sounds silly, but since then, I found it much easier to accept the Switch and its successor don't need to be everything I want in order for me to enjoy the rest of my time with them. I empathize greatly with the people in the Wii U trenches with me that weren't enjoying the ride. For all the fun I had, it definitely wasn't great to get used to the words, "Please understand," all while critics were calling for one of the greatest visionaries in gaming history to step down, because the vision that captured me just wasn't panning out. Since then, Nintendo has turned things around so significantly, they're on their way to becoming one of the most popular brands in the world, even beyond the scope of video games. And lately, I've been able to make some new memories that even rival some of the sweetest from my past. Whether it's getting my ass kicked by my friends and girlfriend in Mario Party, or being begged to play Switch Sports with her young brother the moment I walk in the door, or just being able to continue sharing my love and experiences here with all the art leading up to this. My only hope now is that Nintendo never loses sight of that. And maybe now, with such a proven concept and thick safety net below them, they can feel even more confident in potentially re-exploring some of those ideas they felt compelled to leave behind. It doesn't have to be a Frutiger Arrow aesthetic with Street Pass or Miiverse, but I think there's a strong argument to be made that something like that, allowing people to connect in some small way, would be even more valuable now as other social platforms are trying to rip us apart and prey on people's addiction. And I mean, hell, if there is some miraculous way the Switch 2 could stream a signal between the console and the dock, allowing it to re-implement some of the Wii U's lost functionality, I will be here losing my shit. Between the most significant news coming from Nintendo's competitors being an unprecedented string of game cancellations, failed strategies, and devastating layoffs, the games industry is currently undergoing a prolonged period of struggle. And I think a lot of people are looking towards Nintendo to just rediscover the fun and preserve some of the balance it needs to continue thriving. As I've previously stated, I do believe a struggling Nintendo is a creative Nintendo, but that doesn't necessarily mean they aren't feeling the pressure and are ready to rise to the challenge. Instead of continuing to mope about it, I'm allowing myself to be excited just to see their vision of the future. Nintendo is changing, obviously, but the ball is in their court to prove, for the long haul, it's changed for the better. Thank you for watching. As always with topics like these, my goal isn't necessarily to make sweeping generalizations, but merely to just stamp my current feelings into video so I can look back on them later and also start a conversation. So let me know how you're feeling about the Switch 2. And if you want to keep up with my thoughts, consider subscribing and liking the video. Finally, thank you so much to my patrons, as always, for helping fund videos like these, including the Goats, Julian Messmer, Questing Refuge, and Blacktooth Bob. Thanks again, and I hope to see you again in the next video.